away. So just in the interest of time, are going to get started. So it is my pleasure to welcome you to our public lecture series this evening. My name is Eileen Gipney and I'm Director of the Institute of Food and Health. And this is our first presentation of the 2026 public lecture series in food and health that we host here at the Institute of Food and Health. So really, we host these to provide you with the most up-to-date scientific knowledge about topics in the area of food and health that are of significant interest to yourselves. So tonight's lecture is entitled The Future of Protein, From Animals to Alternatives. And it's an overview of the sources of protein at the traditional level, such as those from animals, and what proteins in the future might look like. And judging by, the registrations we've had and the numbers that are coming in now, I hope we can have some good discussions with everybody about this really interesting topic. We'll have two speakers tonight, Professor Tommy Boland and Dr. Marco Garcia Vaquero. So just to introduce, Tommy is the Professor of Ruminant Nutrition and Sheep Production at UCD, and his research focuses on enhancing sustainability of pasture-based livestock systems, with a particular emphasis on methane mitigation, multi-species sward, and nutrient use efficiency. He serves as co-chair of the Livestock Research Group for the Global Research Alliance and leads the Climate Neutral Animal Agriculture Challenge for the Biorbic SFI Centre. Beyond academia, Tommy is a prominent science communicator, a past president of the Agricultural Sciences Association, and an adjunct associate professor at Massey University in New Zealand. Marco is an assistant professor and an Ad Astra fellow at the School of Agriculture and Food Science, and his work focuses on the sustainable utilization of agri-food products, waste streams, and byproducts for the development of alternative proteins and other food ingredients. And as part of his research, he's interested in the use and optimization of new technologies for high-value bioactive compounds from the agri-food bioproducts and exploring their use in nutraceuticals and functional food applications. So really interesting topic that we're going to have today from both of our speakers. We'll hear the talks from both of the speakers and then we'll have a discussion at the end. So during the talk, if you have any questions, please add them to the Q&A tab that you will see at the bottom of your screen. And then Tommy and myself and Marco will go through those questions and answer those at the end of the lecture. So we look forward to hearing any questions that you wish to have and the discussion we can have at the end. So now I'm going to invite Tommy to start his presentation and hand him over for the first talk. So I'm going to stop sharing and let Tommy.
Thanks, Eileen. I am sharing my slides now, so you might let me know if you can see those in presentation mode.
Okay. It hasn't come up yet, Tommy, but let me see. Yeah, that should work, yeah.
Okay, so can you see that there now?
Yep, that works for me. The first slide says ruminant systems in Ireland.
No, that's not it, sorry. I'll try again. The wonders of technology, eh?
Absolutely. And we're all friends here, so work away till we get it right.
Yeah, bear with me, please. Now, hopefully you can see my title slide at this point.
Maybe 2 seconds. It says it's starting to share. That's it. That works now.
Okay, so you should see the title slide and my email address, etc.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Eileen. Good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to join you this evening, and thanks to Eileen and Geraldine and the Institute of Food and Health for the invitation to speak to you. I'm going to speak about the future of proteins from animals to alternatives, and nobody be surprised given the introduction Eileen gave. I'm going to focus on the animal aspect of proteins and protein production, demand, etc., and talk a little bit about some of the opportunities, some of the challenges, with obviously a specific focus on what we do here in Ireland from a livestock and an animal protein production perspective. So when I got the invitation, I was very happy to accept, and then I sat back for a little while and started to think about how I was going to cover animal proteins and the associated livestock production systems in 15 minutes. And I've been lucky enough to spend a bit of the last 20 years during my work in usually traveling to different locations around the world, be it New Zealand or China or Africa. And I'm involved in food production here in Ireland as well, both through my paid employment and my part-time employment at home as a part-time farmer. And there's really a huge diversity of livestock production systems and animal protein production systems globally. It's something we have a very strong allegiance to and a very strong tradition of here in Ireland. And that's manifest by the fact that in 2025 there was 17 billion worth of agri-food exports exported from this country, largely arising out of animal protein and animal production systems, which play a really important role in our rural economies and maintaining the social viability and the economic viability of our rural economies. But just like any other human activity on the planet, our impact is not benign. And if you look at some of the statistics relating to agriculture and livestock agriculture in particular, 67% of the mass of all vertebrate land animals now is dedicated to livestock. 32% are humans and 1% are wild animals. And if we look back just 10,000 years, it's estimated that that ratio was completely flipped. 99% were wild animals, only 1% were humans. So the development of a human population and the development of agriculture has had a significant impact on the planet. Agriculture globally uses 70% of global freshwater supplies. Anybody, well, I was going to say anybody involved in agriculture, anybody at all realizes we've no shortage of fresh water in Ireland after the last 6 weeks continuous rain we've had. Agriculture utilizes 34% of the global land mass. And of that global land mass dedicated to agriculture, about 67 to 68% is used for livestock. And I'll come back to that in a moment or two as well. And agriculture, forestry, and other land uses globally account for about 24% of greenhouse gas emissions. In Ireland, that figure is a little bit higher, excuse me, with agriculture accounting for 38% of national greenhouse gas emissions in an Irish context. So while there are a lot of benefits from agriculture, obviously in livestock production systems, there are challenges and there are areas we need to work on and we need to improve. But really driving all this is human population growth. And I'm not going to labor this point because everybody's familiar with it. But I mentioned 10,000 years ago on my previous slide. When we look at human population, 10,000 years ago, there were 5 million people on the planet. Just 20 years ago, there were 6.5 billion people on our planet. Today, there are about 8 billion people on the planet. So that's a huge increase in a couple of decades. And it's projected that by 2050, there'll be somewhere in the region of 9 billion people on the planet. And one of the greatest successes of agriculture is the fact that we've continued to largely be able to feed this rapidly increasing global human population. And I often hear things that the food system is broken, we need to radically transform the food system. But I think it's a huge testament to the food system that we have managed to continue to produce food for the majority of this population. And we have achieved that with ever increasing efficiency. This graph just projects back over a 2,000-year timeline pretty much. The quantity of land, because the vast majority of our food to date still comes from land, the quantity of land required to feed an individual person. And then for every person that was added to the planet, even back as recently as 1940, an additional 1.6 hectares of land was required to feed every additional person that was born and added to the human population on the planet. Over about 80 years, that figure reduced to almost 1/3 of what it had previously been. So we're at a ratio of about 0.6 of a hectare per additional person added to the planet. And that's I think a fantastic representation of the increases in food production efficiency, driven by developments in technology, mechanization, plant genetics, animal genetics, and developments in chemistry, whether it be fertilizer, pesticides, herbicides. And now it's recognized that there are challenges which come, and serious challenges in some instances, which come with those improvements in technology. And they form part of what now we're trying to address in how we produce our food, whether that be plant proteins or animal proteins. Looking at the demand globally for animal proteins and the statistics represented by the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, we see that there has been dramatic increases in the demand for animal protein in Asia in particular, A lot of people say that the 20th century was the century of population growth in Asia, and we can see that where the demand for animal protein from 1960 to 2050 will have increased about tenfold. Europe has been pretty static for a long time, as indicated by the blue line here, or sorry, relatively static. And Africa is projected to be the continent of population growth in the 21st century. And again, we're seeing projections that will be pretty much a doubling in the demand for protein, for animal proteins on the African continent in the next 30 years. So we're going to need to produce, and the demand for food production in the next 50 years will be as great as it has been in the entirety of our history as a species since the evolution of agriculture on the planet. So some fairly stark challenges, but some really good opportunities there as well in terms of protein production. I mentioned a little while ago that 67% of the agricultural, or yeah, 67% of the agricultural land area on the planet is utilized for livestock production. If we look here at what that means in terms of calorie production and of protein production, two really important, I suppose, parameters we look at in terms of food production. Despite using 2/3 of the global agricultural area, livestock only produce 17% of the global calorie supply. And despite using 2/3 of the global land area dedicated to agriculture, livestock production, animal proteins account for about 40% of the global protein supply. And at a first glance, one might say, well, that's a pretty inefficient usage of that land area. The fact of the matter is that livestock systems, and particularly ruminant livestock systems, such as those which predominate in Ireland, they convert or upcycle biomass resources, plant materials, waste products from human food production, which otherwise would not be utilizable for food production. They may have a use outside of food production, and there may be developing technology in the future which will allow us to extract some food products from them. But at the moment, if those products weren't being consumed by livestock, then we wouldn't be using them to produce food and to produce animal proteins. And the projections up to 2050 is that there'll be significant and almost a 40% increase in the demand for animal protein on a global basis. So the importance of producing that animal protein with ever increasing efficiency and with reductions in environmental impact are really, really important. Now, when we look at things in the slightly shorter term, the recent Rabobank projections in 2025 suggest that the rate at which global animal protein production is going to slow in 2026. And there may even be modest reductions in the quantity of pork and beef produced for various reasons related to cyclical and structural factors at some of the key producing nations globally. So we're seeing a slight decline in the short term in animal protein production. There's an urgent need to look at how we produce our food in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, reducing antimicrobials, reducing pesticides, and reducing fertilizer usages. So as somebody who produces food and as an animal protein producing nation, a bit like my woolly friend up here in the top right, we're in a little bit of a tight spot at the moment. There's an old saying that curiosity killed the cat. Luckily, my woolly friend here wasn't killed. He was quickly extricated from his position. But we are in challenging times in terms of animal protein production and food production generally. And it's often quoted or often suggested that simply by reducing animal protein sources, it'll lead to significant reductions in global greenhouse gas emissions associated with livestock production and as a result associated with food production systems. And again, some work conducted by the FAO a couple of years ago looking at pathways towards lower emissions in our global food systems and our global livestock systems. To meet the increasing demand for animal proteins, if we continue to produce animal protein as we do today, by 2050, emissions associated with that food production will increase somewhere between 30 to 45%. However, if we engage in a number of mitigation strategies and a number of interventions to reduce those emissions, then we can see significant savings. Certainly, there are parts of the world where we're eating too much animal protein. There are other parts of the world where they probably need to eat more animal protein. but dietary changes can result in relatively modest reductions in overall emissions associated with animal protein production. If we simply increase the productivity, for example, produce more milk per cow, produce more beef per cattle beast, produce more pigs per sow farrowing, we can reduce emissions by about 20% to 25% of where they are today. Breeding technologies and breeding strategies using technology like genomics, even AI can have significant savings. And something which seems relatively simple when you say it out loud, but improving animal health again has the capacity to remove quite a significant proportion of current emissions associated with livestock production systems. Now, delivering these solutions at a global level is somewhat more challenging than simply modeling them, but there are solutions which currently exist that, if implemented, will significantly improve the efficiency with which we produce our livestock and produce our food. To bring it back to a slightly more local level of what we do here in Ireland, and thankfully ChatGPT today produced a very idealized and stylized image of what livestock production looks like in Ireland. And 90% of our agricultural land area in Ireland is dedicated to pasture lands, to grasslands, and by proxy to ruminant livestock production systems producing meat, milk, and in some cases textiles as well. And I touched on this point before, but it's important to understand what these ruminant livestock production systems do. Myself and colleagues in Teagasc a few years ago did a modelling exercise where we looked at all the feed that's consumed in a sheep system, but similar figures will exist for beef and milk systems, and compared that to all the meat produced. And about 92% of all the feed consumed in this sheep system in Ireland was of a human, non-edible nature, meaning that if that land wasn't growing that grass to feed to those sheep, the majority of it would not be otherwise engaged in food production. Certainly some would and could be converted to tillage, but the majority would not be. And that's something that's reflected at a global level, where we see globally about 86% of all the feed resources consumed in our livestock systems, not just ruminants, but monogastrics as well, would be defined as human non-edible feed sources. Again, showing the capacity of livestock, and particularly ruminant livestock, to upcycle biomass resources which are otherwise unavailable for human consumption into high quality amino acids, proteins, and micronutrients. Now, it doesn't mean we don't have challenges, we don't have many problems to address in terms of how we produce our animal proteins. And as I made reference to earlier, our livestock systems, our food production systems in Ireland are very much pasture-based or grass-based. And over the last maybe 40 to 50 years, when farmers were implementing new technologies or new pastures on their farms to improve their efficiency of animal protein production, that was very much predicated on this model of a ryegrass or a grass-only pasture, which in many ways works very, very well and continues to work well. But there are challenges and issues relating to those production systems, particularly nitrogen requirements and some issues around more specific aspects of livestock production systems. But the nitrogen is probably one of the big concerns we have. And we asked ourselves a few years ago, well, probably about 2 decades ago, should we be looking for another way from either an economic perspective? And the driver for this decision changes from year to year. Input supply and availability, which we ran into significant challenges over the last 4 or 5 years, and a whole range of I suppose, ecosystem services, environmental good relating to biodiversity, carbon sequestration, etc. And we developed some long-term work at the UCD Lions Research Farm, where we're looking at pasture systems, in this case dairy beef systems, but similarly with dairy cows, with sheep, and so on. Looking at a whole range, so we try to capture the entirety of our system. One of our roles in the School of Agriculture and Food Science is to produce research that can be implemented at farm level. Farmers make decisions that are going to impact their farming systems for 5, 10, 15, 20 and more years. So we need to be confident that the information we're giving them will stack up over the long term. And we need to ensure that it addresses the system challenges as a whole, not just one component or one piece. So that's where our work is focused in the last decade. And we have this concept of designed diversity, moving away from those simple grass-only pastures to adding in 1 or 2 or more additional plant species. and not just adding in any plant species, but adding in species that will provide and perform a particular role. That's why we refer to it as design diversity. White clover or red clover, for example, reduce the need for external nitrogen application. Plants like chicory and plantain bring additional trace elements and provide additional ecosystem services in our grazing systems. And there are multiple benefits of those multi-species swards. And this just presents one example of how we can continue as a country to produce animal proteins to meet this burgeoning global demand for animal protein while having concurrent positive effects on a whole range of externalities, both positive and what had traditionally been negative externalities associated with livestock production. A few of the highlights would be a 60% reduction in fertilizer applications needed in these diverse pastures or multi-species swards, reducing the carbon footprint of the beef produced by as much as 15% and perhaps even more, and also increasing farmer profitability by 50% or greater, depending on input prices in particular years. So it's a win-win-win type scenario for farmers and for the consumer and for society in general as we produce these more sustainably sourced animal proteins. So to summarize, human population growth is driving the demand for food in general and animal proteins in particular. Globally, livestock systems use 2/3 of agricultural land, which presents us with significant and particular challenges. We use ruminants in our livestock production systems here in this country who can upcycle nutrients that would otherwise not be suited or available for human consumption and convert them into products that, as we've seen, are highly in demand nationally and globally. We have a unique advantage in terms of how we produce our animal proteins in this country that not many other countries around the world have, in that we operate pasture-based production systems. And until recently, those pasture-based production systems have been dominated by grass monocultures. There's a lot of evidence now that would show that adapting more diverse pastures for livestock can deliver multiple benefits, but that's something that will take time to filter through right across the country. And while I've taken, I suppose, a focus on solutions from an Irish context in the very limited time I have available, global food systems face significant challenges and they're going to require a diverse suite of solutions. And no more than the solutions needing a local focus, when we're talking about metrics, whether it be around cost of production, production system, or carbon footprint, for example, associated with beef production or with milk production, we need to be very clear that we're looking at it at a local context because global averages can hide a multitude of variation. So with that, Eileen, I'll finish up there and we'll obviously address the questions at a later point tonight. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was wonderful, Tommy. I've learned loads and always explained incredibly well to us. So I'm going to hand over now to Marco, who's going to talk about the future of protein. And again, just to remind everybody, please do put your questions in and we'll have a lovely discussion at the end.
Okay, I think I'm sharing my screen already.
Yeah, that looks perfect. Thank you, Marco.
Perfect. So similar to Tommy, I just had 15 minutes and Tommy had the challenge of focusing on the animals and I have the challenge to focusing on the rest, which it looks like is quite a lot to cover in one session, but I just tried to focus on few aspects that are common to all of them. The first aspect that I want to cover is why do we need alternative proteins? And the reason is clear. Tommy has mentioned already some of them. We need overall more food. And currently we have new technologies that allow us to actually use some resources that before we actually could not use. We could not consider that food because we don't have the materials to actually make that happen. These new foods can actually represent a huge innovation in the sector. We can have more ingredients to provide for the food sector, new formulations with enhanced properties, the environmental sustainability of the whole system, as Tommy mentioned as well. Then there's people actually that want something else in terms of ethics and concerns about animal welfare of the current production. Then there's also health considerations in someone's diets, people that has high cholesterol, or even people that is looking for something that offers them something healthier than just conventional food. Is what we call functional foods, those type of foods enriched in phenolics that are quite popular now, antioxidant properties. So this is why we need to explore this area a bit more. Sorry, I'm having issues as well here. There you go. In terms of regulations, I also want to mention this. So this is a limitation in terms of exploring all these aspects. This is the Novel Food Regulation by EFSA and established that any food that was not consuming a high volume and was frequently consumed in the EU before 1997 should be considered into the novel food category and they should be investigated further. And that includes new sources that we're going to cover today, new processes. So if you want to do something in another way, that's also included here. Traditional foods that are consumed outside the EU are also considered here, and also newly synthesized compounds. We're going to focus mainly on the first three. So for this presentation, I just focus on an overview of the new protein sources. Bear with me because there are too many, so it's really vague here. Then I'm also going to focus on insects because it's one up and coming that people is quite interested about right now. Then protein extracts and concentrates, what do we mean by them? And then other alternatives that are coming. In terms of new protein sources, here in UCD in my lab, we work with different types. Some of the ones that we have more experience with are seaweed, between 5 to 35% of protein, microalgae, 30 to 65, pulses, there are many pulses as well, 21 to 26, hemp, 20 to 35, insects, you see there as well the wide range, 35 to 61, and microbial sources that includes some microalgae and also some other microbes that you can achieve by fermentation, 30 to 80%. As you can see here, there's a huge range in terms of protein content. So 5 to 35 is a massive amount, for example, of deviation in seaweed. And this is due that all of these are new crops. So we've been mentioning agriculture and farming, and agriculture and farming have been with us for 12,000 years, meaning we have dedicated 12,000 years of research and investment into achieving what we have now. And we are only starting to do some research into this. Here we have a study and we analyze basically the composition of seaweeds at 3 species for 2 years from one location. And we could see massive amount of variations through the year and even depending on the year. And we could see the amount of protein was overall higher in the winter, but this is only one, okay, and 3 species. And this is going to be the same more or less for all of the other proteins that we can produce. So there's going to be massive amount of variation depending on the species and depending on the way that we produce them. I want to mention just few aspects of insect production or insects as food, just because it's something that has gathered the attention of many people and is a bit misunderstood at the moment. All the information that I'm going to provide in these slides come from this book that we edited 2 years ago. So if you are interested, please access, and it's free to access as well. So you can have all the information there. Just as an overview, insect consumption is not new at all. Approximately 2 billion people are currently regular consumers of insects. There's some countries that consume them a lot, especially South America, Mexico, Africa, Asia, and there's some countries that don't want to consume them at all, and some early acceptors as well in the Scandinavian countries that are more open to consume them. Here we have some traditional dishes, by the way. The first one is chapulines with avocado. So this comes from Mexico, and it's basically grasshoppers, and they use it on top of tortillas, on top of tacos, and it's a really popular dish on its own. And down below is a cheese with maggots, live maggots, and that's from Italy. So this is cheese from Sardinia, and they cannot export it, but they can still consume it locally. So as you can see, even in Europe, there's a tradition for consumption of these products. And there's more than 2,000 species of insects that are known to be used for human consumption. And out of those, I want to emphasize these 4. And these 4, I'm emphasizing them because they are the ones that we can consume here. In Europe, we have 4 insects already that are approved for human consumption. That's the mealworm, is the first one on the picture there, and is a larvae from a beetle. Then we have the locust, migratory locust, the house cricket, and lesser mealworm, which is another type of beetle in the larval state. And the EU also say the type of forms that you can consume them as food, and it's basically dried, frozen, and powder forms of this insect. Like every production, including animal production, obviously they have different stages of life. So I want to put that slide here just to broaden the understanding about insects and the production. So we have normally, in the case of the two beetles, they have an egg, they have a larvae, which is the one that is approved for food, they have a pupa, and then the final beetle. And in the case of the other two, is basically an egg, a nymph, and final adult, which is the one that we consume. During this life cycle, although we are only approved several stages of their life cycle, but during all this life cycle, also their composition changes. So they are normally more rich in the larval stages, they are more rich in fats and lower in protein. However, overall, in all these four species, the amount of protein that they can contain is between 42 and 73% in dry bases. So as you can see here, huge amount of possibilities in terms of nutrition. I want to just show how these are produced. In the case of the beetles, for example, this is how they produce the eggs. They have an oviposition stage, so they put the eggs here and they separate the adults as well with this mesh. And the larvae is basically in these boxes. They can be stuck like this or just piled in top of shells in the chambers where they produce them. I want to emphasize as well here in terms of production that the efficiency of this type of production in these ones, in these species, is quite high. So this is the amount of insect that you produce per 1 kg of feed. So in this case, in insects, is more or less 1.7. So out of 1 kg of food, you can produce 1.7 of insect. So in terms of efficiency, it is really high, and that's why it's being prioritized as a key aspect to develop even more. I mentioned as well processing is an area that I'm particularly interested. EFSA has certain approved products, and obviously those products have this processing that they have to follow. And if you modify any of these aspects, you have to ask for approval again. So normally the products that are in the market up to now were blanching, drying to generate different powders, or then freezing, taking out the fat, and then the rest is just making it into a protein-rich powder, or just frozen and sell the insects as whole insects. And then recently, in January 2025, they also have a new process that I want to put there about how to produce insects rich in vitamin D by basically just do an ultraviolet irradiation during the production, and then they achieve this insect, but with high amount of vitamin D, and it's already approved as well. So as you can see, all this information is evolving by the year, so you can never generalize. You might go and check this tomorrow, and you might have something else approved. And the main question with insects for people is how do they taste? And we cannot avoid this. This is one of the main obstacles for actually developing this topic a bit more, and is entomophobia. Entomophobia is an irrational fear to insects, and that can be irrational fear to touch them, to see them, obviously to eat them, and they can be even perceived either with data or without data as something dirty, something that is basically sick. And as I mentioned before, we have several products from insects. This is the full insect form, and this is the powder form. And as you can imagine, the use of in the industry can change a bit. So you can use this as well as an advantage when you're designing your products. In the case of full insects, many people is designing this type of chocolates, and they are already commercialized. You can even find them in eBay, and they put the full insect there so it's visible to the people, and it's basically for somebody that is really adventurous in their eating, and they are really interested in seeing the insect by themselves. And then in the other case, for example, I have here the powder, and it's much easier. It actually smells a bit like nutmeg. So it's quite nutty, and you can use it as flour replacement. This is one of the projects of the student group of product development that I guided this year in year 3 in food science here in the UCD. And they developed this banana bread, investigated the composition, how much flour we can take out, and at the end, this is the final product produced. And they could claim with this product that is high in protein and reduced in sugar. And this is used in the flour, and also the taste was not that bad because they won the first prize this year. So one piece of research that you can do even on that undergrad level. Then the other part that I wanted to cover is the difference between the full part and then the development of protein extracts and concentrates. I developed a lot of research about this. The main thing here is that you have this powder that is approved. That's fine. Here you have seaweed as well in different forms, less meal, more meal, and then you have microalgae as well. But all of these has different properties, and they have color, they have a lot of smell, and you can develop out of them something like this. So due to processing, you can just develop with new technologies, it's not important the name. We can use this original powder to create protein concentrates, which have obviously way less amount of pigments, and they can be used easily in the food industry when you're developing new products. There's always some goods and bads to everything. So in the case of when you use the whole powder form, you will have a massive amount of powder. However, the economic value is way less. And in the case of protein, you have way less powder. However, the economic value is a lot. It increases. So few of the work that we have done, and this is not important, we just use pulses as well, and we try to achieve protein concentrates using different types of technology. Obviously, another limitation is that one technology that you explore in pulses will not work in something else. So we keep on doing this, exploring something at lab scale, and then this was developed actually at industrial scale. We achieved from those beans that are actually farmed in Ireland, 88% protein concentrate, and we recover from those original beans 70% of their protein. As we mentioned, different types of technologies, trying to recover that protein from different sources. And we have experience with hemp, with seaweed, and with microalgae. And these microalgae, we actually got several projects that are on the works at the moment. We have the project SMAC, just basically use of new technologies to achieve these ingredients for cosmetics and also for food applications. And then BioVal, which is exploring actually how do we use different types of biomass that is still not approved for human consumption to get some of these elements and improve, in this case, the production of salmon. So it's basically based on aquaculture. Other alternatives that I want to mention, because we don't have more time to go deeper into all of the types that we can go through, is culture meat. Here in UCD, there's Heather Kenny. She's a PhD with Emma Feeney and Claire Reynolds. And I have part also the supervision in the development of some of the materials that they are using. And she organized the Culture Meat Symposium here in UCD in February that show all the research that has been done and the progress in this area in Europe in the last years. Overall, I want to provide an overview because, again, this is a massive research topics and we can stay here for 2 hours if we go into detail. But the whole process goes to take original cells, basically from embryos or different specialized types. It can be muscle, it can be fat, connective tissue. They can be stored, and then the cells like to grow being attached to something. So they basically put them into different beads of different shapes of different materials. Those they can be then fermented, different size of fermenters as well. And after the fermentation, you achieve a cell concentration, and you can use those cells just to produce products without shape, basically means it can be a burger, it can be a sausage, or you can do some 3D printing. So you print out some scaffolds using materials and you put your cells into it and allow them to grow. And there's all of these points that I mentioned have attracted a lot of research. So there's research into every single one of those points. And the one that had advanced the most is the production of cells. So we went from the production of lab scale, which is basically in flask, to then improve it to 1 liter, pilot scale of 15 liters, 200, and then current production systems of fermenters can reach up to 20,000 liters. And with that, and estimated good cellular cultures, you can get approximately 2 tons of meat. And how do these products look like? There has been massive advancements as well. Here you have in the left side a culture sea bass, and that's produced by the Técnico Lisboa. You can access as well other products that they have. And they produce this sea bass fillet, and they try to also add some different pigments there to see what the consumers will prefer most. And on the right side, I mentioned that all the technologies can be used for different purposes. In this case, is the use of 3D printing, and all these protein concentrates that we have, we can also put them in the 3D printer and do some fillets as well that can simulate, in this case, the texture and also the shape of the traditional products. Thank you so much. Again, if you have any questions,